Okay, welcome everyone, and thank you for coming to the Affordable Housing Commission meeting today. Appreciate it. Before I begin, I like to review the mission of the Affordable Housing Commission, so we're all clear on what we're doing here. And so here goes. The Athens City Affordable Housing Commission is a commission of city government established to review best practices, investigate community affordable housing models, and identify needs and opportunities within Athens city limits to advance decent, safe, sustainable, affordable housing for all city residents. The commission is tasked with providing advice and guidance on measures and policies that influence access to and needs within the local housing market. So, I want to emphasize that we don't just look at low-income housing. We are concerned about housing for renters and homeowners and people with disabilities, people with low income, high income, across the board. So we need housing for everybody for a vibrant community. So with that as a start, I just want to say that although we have a few people missing, we do have quorum, so thank you very much for coming. I appreciate that. Last month, we had working sessions rather than a formal meeting, and so we're not going to go through the minutes because those were just informal with the different committees. So we're going to move on and allow our speaker, who is driven here from Columbus, thank you very much, and that is Chris LeGrand, the Senior Vice President and Corporate Counsel from Woda Cooper Companies, and I'm going to give him a little introduction. So, Chris LeGrand is Senior Vice, I already said that. He previously held position as Chief Housing Investment Officer at Michigan State Housing Development Authority and Director of Legal and Regulatory Affairs at the Michigan Broadband Development Authority. Throughout his career, Chris has shown expertise in legal affairs, legislative matters, and government affairs. And he's earned his JD from the University of Michigan Law School. Some good credentials there. So with no further ado, I think we know who you are, and your PowerPoint has been properly loaded up and ready to go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think Woda Cooper appreciates the work the commission does, the city does, and wants to be a good citizen of the community as an owner-operator of apartments here in Athens. So the chair gave a great overview of me. I don't think I need to say much more than that. I grew up and lived in rural Michigan, and then went to school at undergrad in Grand Rapids, Michigan at Calvin University, and then got my law degree at U of M in Ann Arbor. So who is Woda Cooper? What do we do? We're a national level developer of affordable housing that just happens to be located in Columbus, Ohio. But we do business in 18 states. We have approximately 350 properties. About 32,000 residents live in our properties. We're a little bit unique in that we're vertically integrated. So what I mean by that is we're a developer, we're also a construction contractor, a general contractor, and we're also a property management company. So those are the three big pieces you need to be able to execute in order to be able to do an affordable housing project through the low-income housing tax credit program, and we do all three. There are fewer people that do all three. There are lots of people that just develop. There are people that develop and manage or develop and construct. There are very few national players that do all three things, and we think that gives us some competitive advantage in the market. The other thing I'll point out is that we're an employee-owned company. We're an ESOP. So all the employees of the company have an interest in making sure that the company's successful, because we individually benefit from it. And then also we think we have a long-term focus. There are people that are in this industry that develop to basically stabilize and sell a property and then take that cash and do their next deal. We don't do that. We tend to own and operate properties over the long term. Wanted to give you a little overview of how the low-income housing tax credit works. This is a little bit like drinking from a fire hose. It's a very complicated program. It's a tax policy. It was initially created in the Tax Act of 1986. The president at the time was Ronald Reagan. The HUD secretary at the time was Jack Kemp. of New York, former congressman. He decided that they needed more housing, they needed an answer to affordable housing, but he didn't want more HUD. And what's interesting is he was the HUD secretary at the time. So he created this program that is essentially a public-private partnership where the Congress and the government through the tax code create this credit that is then allocated to the states. It's like a block grant. The states write policy and decide what kinds of housing they want to develop with their low-income housing tax credit. So the program in Ohio is very different from, say, the program in South Carolina. So the LIHTC gives the investor a reduction in their tax liability in exchange for equity that they contribute to the project. So essentially, the way a deal works, a property works, a financing works, is once we have the credits, we then go out and seek an investor, and that investor agrees to become a partner with us in the project. And then the way the deal is structured, they get the tax benefits, the credits that arise out of the construction of the housing. So long as the housing performs, they get the credit. And it's this equity contribution that funds the deal. And the way the investor earns that credit is typically in tranches of equal amount each year for 10 years. And then there's a 15-year compliance period, so it's 10 plus 5, and then a 15-year extended compliance period that applies. So essentially, the federal government is ensuring that when they finance a deal, when they support a deal with credits, that they're going to be affordable units at that property for at least 15 years and more likely 30 years. I'm happy to take any questions at any time. I'm going to roll through a bunch of these things, but if you have a question at any time, please feel free to interrupt me and ask a question.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so one of the complaints that we were hearing, and maybe you're going to address this, was that you guys and other LIHTC developers, whatever, take all of the money from and don't put anything into the city.
Yeah, I've got a couple slides on that
right.
coming.
Okay, and that you don't use local contractors or workers.
Yeah, we'll directly address that in a minute.
I figured you would,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I'm just, okay.
Understood.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just add a quick comment.
Sure.
Since we're televised, I know like being close to the microphone is really important. So I just
Okay.
want to make sure. I don't know what the range on it is.
Okay.
So I just wanted to call that out.
It feels like I'm loud. But
I know it's loud in the room.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
No problem. So one of the reasons we're here is we wanted to come in and talk about a few of the myths versus what we think the reality is. And this is based on other presentations we're aware that you guys have seen and some criticism of us that has come about from those presentations. So we wanted, and we appreciate the opportunity to have the floor and just directly respond to some of these criticisms. And so we're going to talk through a number of these myths and what we think the reality is. The first myth we wanted to cover was affordable housing is somehow low quality and also expensive at the same time. And we think it's actually the opposite. We don't think the costs here are that extraordinary. I think the costs are in the neighborhood of $150,000 a unit approximately at Kearshaw, and approximately like $183 a square foot, which may sound like a lot, but we don't think it is a lot. And the main reason why we would say that is many of the aspects of these properties that cost money are requirements that we have to meet in order to get the credit. So as I said earlier, the state of Ohio develops a policy about how they want to allocate these credits, what the criterion are. And I, as an applicant, have to apply for and win those credits. And typically, those requirements include things like environmental green policy standard. I have to build my unit, we think, superior to what a market rate unit gets built, as far as the insulation, the window quality, the heating system, energy efficiency, all that stuff. The energy performance of our typical LIHTC unit, low-income housing tax credit unit, is going to be superior to what a market rate unit is, and that's because the state tells me I have to do that or incentivizes me to do that to get credits. I say both because sometimes the state's policy says something is threshold. What that means is I'm required to do it. Every project has to do it. Sometimes it's for points. So if I want to score points, the highest scoring properties within categories win. So I'm incentivized to score points. Sometimes I have to do something because I need the points. But we would tell you that whether it's threshold or points, if it's in the QAP, we are probably going to do it because it's what we think we need to do in order to win the credits. The next item we wanted to cover was this concept that Woda Cooper takes the money that we get to do a project in Athens and takes it back to Columbus, and all the benefits leave the local community. So we're just going to go through some of the costs related to Kershaw Green. Kershaw Green was 4 phases of apartments. I think you're all familiar with where it's located in the property. As a total for all 4 phases, we spent or invested approximately $900,000 in taxes, fees, permits, survey fees, and other local expenses that were paid to either the city of Athens or the county government. When we went out to bid the project, so we have a project, we have a construction plan set, we know what our budget is, we're out there to bid and find contractors to develop or to perform the work, we sought local bids. It's in our interest to have local bidders. Local bidders are going to tend to bid more economically, they're going to bid lower, and they're going to tend to not have as much cost because they're there locally. They don't have to travel from somewhere else to bring their people, their material, and everything to Athens. They're already here. So it's in our interest to try to get as many local contracts as we can get. We think over the properties, over the 4 projects, that we invested almost $7 million on local contractors from the Athens area. We also think there was another $12.8 million that was spent on non-Columbus subcontractors and suppliers. So these are contractors that aren't from Athens or Athens County, but are from adjacent counties or from Parkersburg, West Virginia, or someplace that's not Columbus, but is more regional to Athens. So we think that when you look at the numbers, there's another $12.8 million in adjacent county type contractors. And then we would just point out that as we're operating the properties, a lot of our other services we're going to need supportive services. We're going to have to pay payroll to our employees. We're going to pay taxes on an annual basis. We're going to purchase maintenance supplies and other services. We're going to purchase snow plowing. We're going to purchase utilities. As the property operates, a lot of those costs are going to be acquired and paid for locally.
Chris, I'd like to
Sure.
I'd like to talk about the supportive services piece of this.
Sure.
As a former social work professor, and I think I mentioned this when we were at the meeting that I first met you. So as I understand it from talking to our HAPCAP provider, I believe she said that they get only like $100 a year for some kind of supportive services, which isn't a lot. I'm not sure exactly what that includes. So that what I want to bring up is that I'm on the Facebook page for Kershaw Green, and because I'm the city council person that represents that area. And, you know, I can see some of the issues and concerns that they have and some of the, let's just say, disagreements amongst folks. And I would personally like to see the Light Tech projects have someone available, and my preference would be a social work intern that could be supervised through the university that would handle some of the, let's just say, as some people say, social worky kinds of things, like mediation or referrals, advice about where to go for assistance of some kind. And I haven't pursued this much, but I've been thinking about it a lot. And I'm hoping that that might be something that you would consider if we could work it out, because I think it could keep your people happier and maybe more, have some of their needs met so they'd have less frustrations and concerns. And it certainly can't be the same person that could possibly tell them their rent is late or they're going to be evicted. You see where I'm going with this? Mm-hmm. So, and we have a big resource list of every possible need that people can have in the area and who to call. We have the university right here, and they're always looking for more interns in different places. So I'd like you to think about that and maybe go back and consider that as a possibility or something like it. Mm-hmm. I'm not asking you to add more staff necessarily. I'm just saying that it could conceivably make these, the people that live there last longer, do better. You know, maybe they wouldn't get evicted because they knew who to go to for some support or encouragement or whatever. So I'd like you to comment on that.
Yeah, I think my reaction to that is that supportive services in our industry can mean a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, it can mean, you know, minimal type of services that are provided on an as-needed basis.
Mm-hmm.
It can mean, I mean, there's a style of housing that in the industry is called PSH, permanent supportive housing, where it's a high level of services that are typically contracted for and provided. You know, you can get into the whole managed care area if you go really advanced. So there's a continuum. There's a spectrum
Sure.
of services that we as an owner-operator management company deal with. We do all different types of deals, and arrangements, depending on what we signed up for, what we agreed to do. In some states, in some QAPs, we're applying for credits within a supportive services set-aside category, where we're required to provide those enhanced services and budget for those and figure out ways to fund them. There are other times where, again, we're just applying for a general senior or family designated deal, and typically then the supportive service requirement is pretty low. There's a requirement that you have a service provider that you have a connection with and that you're able to process issues with, but there might not be a specific time, number of hours committed by that provider or anything like that. So I guess what I just want to describe to the commission is that there's a range of options here. There's a range of possibilities, and WODA Cooper and WODA Management deal with all different types of situations depending on the type of community we're dealing with, the type of deal we're dealing with, the type of clientele we're serving. But, you know, you're not the first one to say, gosh, it would be great if we had more services. Is there a way we can get more services to your tenant? I think we're willing to have a dialogue about that and talk about what our current arrangements at Kearshaw are and what we could potentially do to change that if it was necessary.
Great, and I hope we can have that conversation with whomever.
Yeah,
But,
no, good. We can definitely set you up with the right people in our management group and have that conversation. No
Great,
problem.
okay, thank you. I'll look forward to that conversation. I do want to mention, too, that you may be familiar that the Ridges, the Ridges facility is being transferred to, the land and the buildings are being transferred over. I bring this up because part of that plan is that they're looking for a full supportive services facility as part of that. So,
Is the Ridges that Kirkbride we went to? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
exactly.
So my colleague Jack Kuhn, who's here, who works for our management company, he and I, after the meeting we did with you, drove around town a little bit, and he was showing me different things. He took me up to the hill to the Ridges, and we drove around there. I'm familiar with some redevelopments of Kirkbride hospitals that have occurred in other states. In Michigan,
Yes.
we did a big one in Grand Traverse.
Well,
when I
we're-
was with MISHDA, we did a significant investment there.
And we've seen pictures of that, and that's some of the things we want to replicate. But anyway, there's some options there for you.
There will definitely be interest from developers in that type of arrangement.
Yeah, from what I understand, that transfer could be as soon as June.
Okay?
So by then, they're going to start, you know, that's not guaranteed, you know, things, first it was last December, and then it was, but anyway.
Nothing is guaranteed in this business.
No, but just saying, keep your eye out on it.
Yep. Anything else? So the next thing we want to talk about is a little bit kind of an overview of the fact that the total construction cost, when we say construction cost, we really mean what we call a TDC, a total development cost. This is all in, this is everything, was around, you know, almost $30 million, $29.85 million for 4 phases. And, you know, the reaction we were hearing was, wow, that's a lot of money. Where did it all go? And one of the things we wanted to emphasize was that there's a lot of risk for us when we take on a deal of this size and this many units. Because when we take those credits and say to the state of Ohio, yes, we're going to develop these 4 phases and produce these units and rent these units consistent with the law, we actually have to do it. We can't take somebody's money and then not deliver. And when we sign these deals and these agreements and we make arrangements with an investor, the investor is going to require Woda Cooper itself or our principals to guarantee various things. We have to guarantee on budget completion. So we have to guarantee that we're going to be able to hit our construction number. If we don't hit our construction number, you blow the guarantee, you have obligation perhaps beyond what the funding was if you need it to complete the deal. We have to guarantee annual operation during that 15-year compliance window. We have to guarantee that we're going to be able to operate the property consistent with the rules. We guarantee tax credit delivery. At the end of construction, before I can actually file paperwork with the Internal Revenue Service that allows my investor to start claiming that flow of credits they're expecting, I have to demonstrate that I delivered the tax credits. In other words, that I have an initial occupant in every unit that qualifies with the income level and meets the requirements of the program. If I don't actually occupy the unit within the allotted time period, I can't certify that to the service. I can't allow the investor that opportunity to claim credits. And what the investors require us to do is guarantee that such that if we fail, we have to pay them back their investment, essentially. The other thing that we would point out is, one of the criticisms was, well, there was a lot of developer fee paid on this deal. And I think it was around $5 million in total developer fee. But $1.4 million of that was loaned back into the project immediately to make the project viable. So in order to make the pro forma work, balance, we had to loan some of that developer fee back into the deal, and we'll only get that back from operations over the life of the deal. Let's go back one. So that was the point, that the development fees are only paid out at milestones. So typically, even the developer fee that I don't loan back to the deal, I don't get that all at once. I get a piece of it at initial closing. I get a piece of it at construction completion. I probably get another piece of it at what we call 8609. That's the form that I file with the service and with the state that allows my equity investor to start claiming credits. And then probably there's usually a developer fee that's paid at what they call property stabilization, which is usually 2 years of operating that shows I was able to operate the property effectively and at budget. So it's important to understand that, well, that $5 million sounds like a lot. I didn't get that all at once. Woda Cooper doesn't get that all at once. We get it over time, basically, if we perform. The next myth we wanted to talk about was that affordable housing is sort of a closed club, not open to new developers. One of your commenters was big on, hey, this is a secret society here that Woda Cooper is part of, and there's just not an opportunity for anybody else to get in this business. We would say, number one, it's a complicated and specialized business. Not just anybody can show up and do a project, perform. There's a lot that goes into this. We have a lot of time and effort to find a site. We then have to figure out all the different things we need to do to submit an application to the state. Those applications are quite detailed. We then have to get through that process and win the award. We then have to, set up our lender and our equity. We have to go through all that. We have to, do construction plans. There's a lot of work here that's pretty complicated, and it's specialized work. But we don't think it's a closed club. We think it's a situation where state allocators, so the state officials that decide where to put the credits, and investors that ultimately invest in the deals and the credits, they tend to choose developers like us who have experience and have done it before. If you're looking for a surgery, you're going to go to an accomplished surgeon. You're not going to go to someone who's never done this type of surgery before, right? So it's like that. The allocators and the investors tend to want to do business with people and are willing to pay more for the credits if they're doing business with somebody that they know can execute and has a history of executing, as opposed to someone that's never done a deal before and has never executed before. And again, we just emphasize that it's because of how complex these deals are and how difficult they are to put together that tends to cause people to want to do business with people that have done projects like this in the past. And we just point out that we've been in the field for decades. The company was essentially founded in 1990 and has existed for almost as long as the credit has existed. One of the comments that we heard was that affordable housing increases crime and lowers local property values. We don't agree. We think it's the opposite. We think when you look specifically at Kershaw Green that there really hasn't been any increase in crime as a result of Kershaw Green going in there. We also think that high quality housing like Kershaw Green supports the local community, provides people a place to live, and tends to have a positive influence on a neighborhood and not a negative influence like arguing that it creates crime would be.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that I did when I presented in front of the Planning Commission about this, there really wasn't evidence that the Kershaw Green had increased crime. And since I live in the neighborhood, it certainly hasn't hurt my property values. So I agree with you on that.
Yeah. So what we did is we did an audit of 2024 police calls at Kershaw Green. And I think it's around 41 calls in total to your police services. That's a list of what they were about. There was one theft call, 34 directed patrol calls. So, hey, can you send a unit to look at something? One for an open door, one for a suspicious vehicle, one juvenile call, one to assist another agency, one noise complaint, and one traffic stop. And out of those approximately 40 calls, as far as we can tell, your police department made 3 arrests as a result of those calls. So, we don't think that demonstrates, given that we've got approximately 200 units out there, we don't think that demonstrates a significant, crime issue. The other thing that we hear, and we hear this routinely, that, a LIHTC affordable housing project is quote unquote the projects. It's like the big projects in big cities that were done by HUD and the federal government in the 60s and 70s. So I think this is a picture of the notorious project in Chicago that was called Cabrini Green that you read about and you hear about, how horrible that neighborhood became after this was developed. And we don't think an affordable housing project today is anything like that. And we would point out that there's no extreme concentration of poverty like that. I mean, here we have 200 units. Cabrini Green was thousands of units in one neighborhood in Chicago and, was definitely an example of concentrating poverty in an area. We would also advise that we don't think the clientele is identically is a lot the same. The affordable housing program projects tend to have more workforce housing component to them than a public housing project might. The public housing program was run by HUD and done by HUD, and the government was the owner and operator and constructor of the project. That's not how these are done. As I've described, these are public-private partnerships between the federal government, the state government, a developer, and an investor and lender. And as I've already said, there's no mega structures of thousands of units associated with the typical low-income housing tax credit project. And then the last thing we just wanted to highlight was sort of the AMI percentage income restriction at Kershaw. So this is all 4 projects combined. And this just sort of gives more detail to that last slide. These are the area median income for Athens County percentages that we have units designated at. So what that means is we have 32 units at 30% AMI. We have 50 units at 50%. 41 units at 60%, and 68 units at 80%. Now, typically, when the program was created, I wasn't allowed under the program to do any 80s. Congress, a few years ago, decided to allow something called income averaging, where as long as the average of all units together is 60% or below, I can do some 80s. And so that's what we did here. We elected through the state and through the federal system to check a box that says, we want to do income averaging. We want to do some 80% units. And what that just means is I've got tenants there who may earn more income than what would otherwise allow them to qualify for the typical LIHTC property. So this tends to be teachers, policemen, firemen, people with entry-level private sector jobs, that sort of thing. The other thing we would always point out is that this is your income level at your initial occupancy. If you stay in the apartment, your income can go up and you can continue to live there until there is something we call a recertification event, where if we have to recertify all the incomes again, we have to reassess your income and look at it again. But that is a rare thing that happens in the context of one of these deals, and probably doesn't happen for 15 or 20 years. So it's a positive that people can move in, and if their income happens to go up, they can continue to have a unit at the property.
If you wouldn't mind, we're kind of running out of time for
Yeah.
you, but.
This is actually the last slide. So.
Yeah, you did say it was the end, but
Yeah.
the biggest complaint I've seen on the Facebook page had to do with understanding what you just said.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get an increase.
Mm-hmm.
I got an increase in rent, but my pay didn't increase. How could that, or something like that. In any case, they're very confused, and so they get upset. And then they start chatting amongst each other about how you're being unfair. And I think it's just that it's a bit confusing. And so I'm just suggesting that you all make this a little bit more clear to those folks, because happy renters are more responsible renters. And so
Sure.
Making an extra effort on that would be really helpful.
Sure, I think what we would say to that is those limits are the limits that we're not allowed to exceed. Typically, when we place a unit in service, place a property in service, we set those rents less than that level. And then there is some opportunity on an annual basis that the rent might go up a little bit to cover our increased costs over time. We try to make that as clear as possible to the tenant that, look, this is your rent right now. Your rent will never exceed the income limit associated with your unit. And technically, it's 30%. The rent won't exceed 30% of whatever that income level is. So it's 30 of 30 or 30 of 50 or 30 of 60. That's the cap that the rent has. But as I said, typically when we initially occupy, we give ourselves some room to grow that rent over time. And we only increase rent when we think we need to. But it sounds to me like that's the complaint, that they didn't understand that their rent could potentially go up. And
Right.
on an annual basis, it's reviewed, and depending on what's going on in the market, the rent can go up.
Another question that I've been hearing about is, well, they're always saying that they're, looking for more renters, and if that's the case, we don't need any more light tech projects. So one of my questions is, if you have a total of 32 units, for example, at the 30%, so does that mean that all the others are full, but the ones that are designated or whatever for that 30%, you need more of those?
Yeah, well,
Do you know what I'm saying?
It depends on, when you come in and apply to us, we're going to assess what rent level we think you qualify
Right,
at.
right.
And we're going to tell you either we think you qualify or you don't. We maintain wait lists, and we can put you on the wait list if there isn't a unit at your income level.
Right. So you have to maintain those total unit balance.
We have to maintain those designations. If we've told the state and the feds that we have 32 30s, we have to maintain 32 30s.
Okay, so you're maybe, yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I thought, but I just wanted to be able to explain to somebody
Right.
who kept saying, oh, we must not need them because you've got the signs up saying that you have openings, so.
Yeah, we'll tell you that there tends to be some turnover of units in a market. That's just normal in a property. We target to have no more than 10% vacancy and try to be no more than 5% vacancy.
Sure.
It's in our interest to lease as many units as we can lease. We always say we're in the business of leasing units, and we don't want vacant units. So we're going to do everything we can to try to make sure that we have somebody in that unit at all times.
And you have some units going up in the Plains, right? Is that true?
There is a proposal that one of my colleagues is working on up there to an application up there, yes.
Okay. Any others in our nearby area?
So I'm an attorney, I'm a policy guy, I work, and I'm familiar with who our development team is, but, you know, they're always doing stuff, they're always looking for that next property that we're gonna try to develop. They're always looking for opportunities to submit applications. I'm not necessarily aware of everything that's going on,
That's okay, we understand.
but I would
curious.
just say that we're active in this market, we're looking for opportunities. You know, we like to think we're one of the more successful and accomplished developers of low-income housing in Ohio.
Okay,
And we want to continue to be active in this market and be active with you and be a good corporate citizen in town and operate a high-quality property that maximizes both our ability to generate income off it and the ability to provide quality, affordable housing to the community.
thank you. Does anybody?
I just have one comment.
Sure.
Thank you for all of this information. So here locally, there's a reporter who's been writing a series of housing articles in, I think it's WOUB. And in one of those articles, one of the people that were interviewed was talking about how wonderful it was to be able to move into Kershaw Green and how that was a really, like, it was a positive experience. And so what I might be missing out of this story, and other people in our community might be a compelling argument to support these kinds of projects, is like, who are we helping? Who's living there? You mentioned a certain amount of like teachers, police, and firemen. Like, that's a compelling story to talk about, like, our citizens in this community that we are housing who wouldn't otherwise be able to do that. And so, like, I know people do care about the economics and like who's making money off of what, but I also think that hearing about who's living there would be really great. A great addition to this.
I think I talked to those reporters and
Yeah.
was part of that series.
Yeah.
Early on, I was I think maybe the first article I gave
Yeah.
them an interview. No, we agree. You know, we have, one thing that this touches on is we have significant fair housing obligations. So, you know, we don't necessarily get to pick our tenant, right? We have to just work with the people that come in the door and say, hey, I'm interested. And that means that we are going to end up with a range of different situations, right? We always tell people that another myth that you sometimes hear is, oh, if we build this affordable housing in Athens, people from Cleveland are going to move here. And we always say that if you look at it nationally, there's been analyses that have been done that show that the vast majority of people that move into an affordable housing complex that goes on market are from within 20 miles of the property. You know, people don't travel along typically great distances to get an affordable unit. But, you know, look, we are in favor of that. We are clearly true believers in this product and in this industry. We want to see property succeed. We would obviously like to be the developer and the owner and the manager of as many of them as possible, but we get that we're not going to possibly do every deal. There's others in the industry, and we're generally supportive of industry efforts to try to, you know, communicate with people about the program and the way the program works, and that's part of the reason why we wanted to come today. But also, you know, just be good participants in the community and in the program.
Thank you.
How many total units in Kershaw Green are vacant overall?
I'm going to guess very few. Do you have to know what the vacancy number is right now, John? We don't have it at the top of our heads, but it's not. I sit in a meeting where we talk about all the properties that have low vacancy or issues, and Kershaw is not on that list. It took a while to lease it up, though, because we had construction phases that had to complete. And then, you know, the interesting thing is if you have phase one and then you're putting phase two into production and you're trying to lease phase two, but you still have vacant units at phase one, they sort of compete against each other for a little while. So when we built the property and initially leased up, there were going to be some transition issues as we marketed and filled units. But I don't believe that there would be a significant vacancy issue there right now.
And another question, one of the discussions and comments that have come before council has been the accessibility, walkability, the sidewalk issues. So whenever you plan a unit like this, is that something that you see as a developer that is your responsibility to provide? Or should that be the city saying that that is something that is desired in conversation with your developers?
It depends where we're talking about. So when we propose a property and do the plans, we're required on our property, on the part we own, we're required to meet a bunch of standards. There's extensive federal law on this. There's something called the UFAS, the Universal Federal Accessibility Standard, that we have to meet. Depending on the designation of the unit, whether it be an accessible unit or just a standard unit, there are different standards. There are standards about what's called visitability, that even if it's technically not a fully accessible unit, there has to be the ability for someone in a wheelchair to visit the property and maneuver a wheelchair through the unit. So there's all kinds of design requirements that we have to meet as far as accessibility standard and the like. What I have to clarify, though, is as soon as you leave our property, if you go onto the public street or the public walkway, I think that's what you're
That's what
talking
I'm
about.
getting at, yes.
That is not our responsibility, but obviously we want to see that be provided. We think it's good for the community. We think it helps obviously market the property if it's connected. And I know in this case, there's been a lot of talk about the sidewalk access and the like.
Right.
And I know we provided $70,000 to help pay for the sidewalks, even though we weren't required to, because we feel it's that important. And I just don't think we understand exactly why the situation is the way it is. I think it's a city issue, is the way I would describe it.
It's complicated, but yes, they
Thank
did
you.
provide $70,000. Yes.
Can we share the podium for a second?
Yeah, sure.
So this issue, thank you, Mary, for bringing it up. Another question maybe you have some data for, which would be interesting, because we've had discussions at City Council, like mentioned, about the transportation needs of the people that live at these communities. And car ownership rates is one of the big metrics that would be interesting to hear if you have any data on that compared to the general public, what the car ownership rates are at in general, if you know numbers, or at your particular properties or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that varies rather dramatically property to property. Parking is something that is somewhat controversial in the industry. Depending on where I'm going to develop, some places want me to provide a lot of parking. Many urban areas want me to provide almost zero parking now. There's almost like this militant group that doesn't want us to provide parking and wants to require people to use public transportation. We're kind of agnostic on that. We will do what we think is the requirement. Obviously, if there is a regulatory requirement, if there is a standard in the community, we're going to meet that requirement. We think in most cases that it's a good idea to provide somewhere between 1 and 2 spaces per unit at the property. But I'll tell you that I'm aware of properties we've developed with more than that in parking, and I'm aware of situations where we've developed less than that in parking. And that typically has to do with local zoning and local ordinance requirements that tell us either we have to have excess parking, or in many cases, like I'm saying, in urban areas, actually tell you can't have more than 1 parking spot per unit. So that varies property to property, and I would tell you that depending on your clientele, like a senior property typically needs less parking than a family property does. And then if it's a special needs property, that's a whole nother category, right? So parking is quite complicated is I guess my basic response to the question. Do you have a follow-up? Is there?
No, but by the way, I'm Rob Delich. I live on Morris Avenue here in the city. I didn't say that at first. The discussion about the idea that, so it's an affordable housing project, but they still are going to need lots of parking because most of them are going to have cars. Some of the projects have been in locations that didn't have sidewalk access as well, and the ones being considered currently are like that. And so some of the argument against it is is that they're going to have lots of parking. They're not going to be walking anywhere because they're all going to have cars, and that's a concern. And here in Athens, we're a pretty walkable place, but when you get on the edges of the city, which is where many of these developments are, that's not built up yet to support that. So there's some concerns about providing the right services to get people places. Bus service is pretty good here for a small city, but on the fringes, the walkability and bikeability is not as good. And you've experienced that, I think, with Kershaw Green.
No, I think my only further comment would be that, like I said, this is a complicated issue, that there are multiple objectives that people have. I would say there's probably, no one-size-fits-all solution here. It's a situation where a developer is going to come in, try to understand what the requirements are in the local code and try to comply with those. And then at some level is going to try to predict, how many parking spots do I think my residents are going to demand? I mean, I have developments out of my 350 developments. I have developments where I have parking lots that are 2/3 empty. I have developments where my parking is extremely tight, right? Where I basically don't have any extra spaces because they're all occupied. And so we have to be able to manage properties in either situation. I think from a development perspective, we want to comply with what the local desires are on it. And then we also have some interest in, hey, given this type of property, this is how many spots we would intend to want to build.
Chris?
Yeah.
We've gone over the
Yeah,
time
I'm
when
sorry.
No, that's great. We've had questions, and
Yeah.
I appreciate you answering them, but
Yeah.
we do have some business we want to attend.
Okay.
We try to hold to a pretty tight 1-hour
I
schedule.
understand. I just say thank you for inviting us to come and present. And we want to be good citizens in the community, and we're happy to come back again at some point. And we're also happy to consult with you informally as necessary. And we'll definitely look forward to talk about the supportive service issue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank
I
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, that was helpful. We're trying to learn as much as we can here about LIHTC and all of the nuances. Of course, as you said, it's very complicated, and there's things that we haven't discussed that I hear are options, but we're not going to talk about them today. We're going to try to move on to some other things. So if we could have the new development committee just briefly talk about where you're at and what you're working on, that would be great.
So today's meeting, we didn't have many committee members who were able to attend, but we focused on talking about the housing roundtable that will be an opportunity to kind of advertise to developers our interest and our want for development, and also potentially some partnership opportunities, as well as maybe some funding opportunities, as well as properties that may be open for development or possible for development. That was the majority of our conversation today. On our agenda, we also had a line item about short-term rentals, but I'm still waiting for a final report from Code on that. So there wasn't an update on that agenda item specifically.
Okay, and we had talked about getting into the whole ADU thing down the road here as well.
Yes, I think ADUs will be a bigger topic for later down the road.
Okay. And for those of you that don't know, Megan is our city planner, so is the big cheese around here for that new information. Okay, so let me talk briefly about what's going on with neighborhood revitalization. There were just a few of us that came today, but we also talked last month because we had a working session. So let's start off, and if you don't mind, Amy, since you kind of were in one of the organizers of the cleanup and the spruce up, if you could kind of let people know what's going on and some of the tasks that you have promised that you would work on.
Sure.
Okay.
So as part of Beautification Week, the West Side had 2 events. One was a bike path cleanup of some of the trash areas, concentrations of where trash was, and then
Along the bike path and
along the bike
parks.
path. Yes, thank you. And then on the same day, there was a small group of folks from the West Side Community Association who encouraged West Siders to just take a look around their yards, their properties, their porches, and kind of spruce things up, get ready for spring, take advantage of the free city service spring cleanup week where citizens can put as many pieces of bagged trash on their curb for trash pickup as they want.
And that'll be all week, by the way,
all
just so
week
you
long.
know.
Yep. And then also collecting things that could go to recycle day on April 26th. So like bigger items that you might not throw away, but could be recycled into something else. E-waste was one of them. I personally found some e-waste at my house that I will be taking. And then just, thinking about, I don't have specific numbers for everything, but there were people that participated, and it was the first time that we've kind of done something like this since the pandemic, and about a dozen or so people were out doing things on the day of around their properties, and then I think even more so helped at
Inside.
the bike path cleanup.
Yeah, we probably had about 20, 25
Yep.
folks, students and community members and people from different organizations trying to help out. There will be another cleanup, part 2 cleanup, tomorrow on Thursday. I don't know exactly the time of that, but they're making some real progress. They cleaned up 10 different sites, which is great, and some of them were huge. So that was, I think part of this is, it's an effort to try to get the different neighborhoods to gather together and make their places nicer, make the community nicer, in part by helping each other out. So this is like a step in that direction. We're hoping that we can build on this for future years so that there's a greater sense of community and unity. And when you have that happen, people care more about their place, and they also care about their neighbor down the street who can't shovel their driveway because they're 90 years old, that sort of thing. So we're hoping to have a template for how to do this kind of thing, and maybe add picnics and all kinds of other things, because we think that will help that whole neighborhood revitalization, community spirit, and address loneliness, but also, make the houses and areas look better and are safer and whatnot. So that's something that I'm really proud of. And then Zach, who is our executive director of the Metropolitan Housing Authority, who was also at the meeting with you, Chris, you are going to go to a conference and you're going to bring back some information.
Yes, we have our NORO conference this week. Actually be leaving right after this meeting, heading to Detroit. And then we actually have our OHAC conference as well coming up, the Ohio Housing Authorities. And we have some light tech meetings in that as well. So hopefully to gather some more information.
Some ideas to bring back to us. The other thing that the Neighborhood Revitalization is working on is how we can provide more and better information for renters and landlords so that we have a way of making sure that our rentals are safer and address the issues that renters are concerned about, and also landlords. So I've requested some information from the city to help us gather some statistics and information that could be helpful. I also alluded earlier to the fact that I've spoken with Jim Kaufman, the executive director of real estate at Ohio University, which is why I brought back that recent information about that it looks like we're getting closer to transferring that property so that we can have up to 700 units is the outside goal of this, both in the historic buildings, but as well as the surrounding adjacent land. So that is on its way, and I'm going to be talking with Jim Kaufman as well regarding trying to work on housing issues that the university is concerned about, both in terms of rentals as well as new housing. So that, I think, will be, he seems very interested in finding out, how the housing situation is for students as well as faculty, and has, great interest in that. So those are the key things that I think I wanted to mention. I'll bring back more. I promise to find some more information about best practices for code enforcement, the amazing array of things that our Citizen Serve code enforcement software can provide, and maybe we could take better advantage of. So I'm pretty excited about some opportunities there that I'll be talking about next month. So Any closing comments, concerns? And remember, it's always going to be Tuesday, the third week of the month. So we hope to see you then. Any comments from the audience?
I have one comment, just a city update really quick. At the
Yes,
last
please.
planning commission meeting, there was a zone change. It was a returning zone change from 111 Hooper Street. They had previously withdrawn their application, changed their application financing basically a little bit. They're going for a different pool of money with the state. So they're coming back and they got approval from the planning commission to move forward with the same zone change request that they had filed previously in the fall. Another item too, Spire Development, they didn't require a zone change for this property, but they are also doing a LIHTC development called Blackburn Landing, and they just got Title 41 approval from the Planning Commission at the last meeting as well.
Oh, great.
So very brief updates on those two projects, but wanted to be sure to mention that at this meeting.
Yeah, I think that, part of our responsibility is to comment on those kinds of projects and give advice to City Council. The Hooper project team came and spoke to City Council last night, and I guess my concerns are how far it is outside the city and transportation and sidewalks, but other than that, it seems pretty straightforward. And again, they are requesting a zoning change, so the city's looking at deciding about that. So any comments or thoughts you have about that are absolutely welcome. Okay, it's now 12:57, so anybody have anything you want to mention? All right, so our next meeting will be, let me double check here, the calendar, so everybody knows. And of course, I turned off my phone, so give me a second in case somebody has theirs open and they can tell me faster than I've got it. That'd be great. Mary, you look like you're ready. What's the third?
May the 20th.
May 20th. Okay, everybody remember, May 20th, noon, right here. And barring any other comments or changes, we will also have our committees at 11 o'clock here for the neighborhood revitalization, and downstairs in the Berry conference room, assuming it's open, they will have the new development committee.
We will make sure the conference room is open.
Thank you. You're wonderful, Megan. I appreciate it. All right. Well, at 12:58, I'm okay to adjourn if everybody else is okay with that.
So move.
Okay. And everybody, yes?
Yep.
Okay, we're ready. Done. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.